Testing. Okay. Hello, good morning. This is the sorry. This is the foundational psychotherapy track, and Sophia has informed me that she will be speaking for about 45 minutes, holding questions until the end, where she'll have about 15 minutes to respond to any questions that may arise. All right? Sophia Luu is a freelance designer, researcher, and survivor activist who specializes in topics that people find difficult to talk about. She has 5+ years experience in practicing inclusive and trauma-informed design techniques focusing on childhood sexual abuse and racism in healthcare. She tries her best to practice what she preaches, center on lived, marginalized experiences, and as a trained mental health first aider, has developed a method called Serious Joy to approach challenging topics. In March 2023, Sophia launched a platform called Secrets Worth Sharing on having more approachable conversations on childhood sexual abuse shortly after her former workplace accidentally hired a convicted child sex offender. She has consulted a range of clients, including McKinsey Design, Cheyenne, Tech for Survivors of Sexual Abuse, the ICO, Government's Data Advisory Body, the NHS, Space 10, IKEA's Design Lab, On Your Side, reporting for ESEA, Survivors of Hate Crimes, and Genomics England. She guest lectures design for social good at Brighton and Sheffield Hallam University. I give you Sophia Luu.
Thank you. Can I just say, there is nothing more professionally cringe than having your own bio read out to you and then realizing that you sent the wrong one, but it's done now. Before I start, I actually just wanted to make a personal note. So I lost a close relative recently called David Fenner. He used to study here, and it was always his dream that one of us would lecture at Oxford. And I think it's quite emotional that 2 weeks on from today, that is what I'm doing. So that's for you, David. I really didn't expect this many people to be coming. So great for me. So happy that people are interested in child sex abuse. But before we start, I just wanted to clarify. Oh. Sorry, online audience. Take a bit of time. Sorry, Herbie. Well, while Herbie's helping us out, just wanted to clarify that I'm not going to be going into any graphic details. This is a talk about how we talk about childhood sexual abuse. Stunning! Thank you, Herbie. I won't be going into any graphic details, so please don't worry about that. I'm very grateful that you even came to a talk on child sex abuse. I'm not now going to tell you really graphic types of abuse or things like that. Please be mindful of other people. We never know if there's other survivors in this room, so just be very aware of that when you're having these conversations with others. You can leave at any time. This is not a stand-up show. You're not going to get heckled as you leave. It's all fine. I'm not going to pick on you. I completely understand sometimes you just want a breather. Oh dear. Any question is welcome, and I really do mean that. I had a talk a few weeks ago where someone said to me, but aren't a lot of survivors most likely to abuse people anyway? And it was a big one. It was good to tell the facts and debunk that a bit, and I guess my philosophy is always ask those difficult questions now so that you're not put in a position where you are harming someone else through ignorance. So please do ask anything you like. Right, this is a bit embarrassing, because I'm talking to a room of therapists, but I am a mental health first aider. So if anyone does want to talk to me, I will be hanging around for 10, 15 minutes after if you just want to decompress about the talk. And finally, so there's a couple of terms that I'm going to be saying quite a lot, survivors being one of them. I am very aware that the word survivor is quite a controversial term. Not a lot of people would describe themselves as having survived what they experienced. But also I recognize that victim is also a very tricky term and is very loaded in legal and justice systems. So, wow, honored that people are taking photos of this. But yeah, I will be saying survivors. I might say CSA as opposed to child sex abuse. But yeah, just roll with it. I'm also just going to put a timer on to make sure that I keep on time. Right. I've been thinking long and hard about how I introduce the complex nature of who I am as a survivor, the history of childhood sexual abuse, and the systems that uphold it, mostly in the UK. And I thought the best way to do that would be to share a series of newspaper articles with you. So, on me for a second. This is the first time that I appeared in a newspaper. I was very proud of myself. I was at a state school in Croydon and I'd absolutely smashed my GCSEs. So for those of you who are overseas, it's like your exams you do when you're 16. And at the time, it feels like the biggest thing in the world, but you know. I later went on to study history and philosophy of science at Cambridge and then got scouted for McKinsey, where I worked as an anti-racism designer for a number of years as around the healthcare system. And I share all that because despite all of these successes, and they were, I was also very much dealing with the trauma of my child sex abuse that I'd experienced, which leads me to the second time I appeared in a newspaper, which was when the person who abused me was jailed for serious sexual offences against children. And I must say, it's really weird reading about yourself in a newspaper for something like this, because you're anonymized, you are written about as though you are a child, and despite being 8 years old when the abuse started, I was 20 when all of this happened and this newspaper article came out. And I was like, that's weird. They're writing about me as if I'm 8 years old now, and everything's focusing on what the perpetrator has done, and everyone's focusing on like his actions, but not actually the survivors, and also what now? And no one told me this article was going out, and what purpose is that serving? I deliberately blur his name, by the way, because my child sex abuse was intrafamilial, and I think that so often these conversations are about abusers and not actually about survivors. So that was that. But I just wanted to highlight that this is lucky. Very rarely do people actually even get a conviction for their experiences of child sex abuse. I am lucky that I disclosed and that it was taken well. 31% of people who disclose for the first time report having a really negative experience where they are gaslit, where they are doubted, and you can only imagine the effects that that then later has on their trauma. I'm also really lucky that, to be honest, I'm standing up in front of you today. Like, statistically speaking, about a quarter of the people in this room will have experienced childhood sexual abuse. And I know for so many reasons, it would be there's so many barriers to even standing up in front of here. And I do this work partly for all of you guys in the room as well. We are so used to seeing childhood sexual abuse on newspaper articles that focus on the abuser. And not only that, but we only seem to hear about it when those abusers are high profile. Take the last year of the major headlines in childhood sexual abuse. And I think this is really damaging because, for the first reason that I talked about earlier, we focus on the person themselves who abuses and not the actions and the support for survivors. But also, we paint a very certain image in our head about what child sex abuse is. It is an older man, a younger child, typically a cis girl, and a certain type of action. And I think when you see this all the time in media, and even then not covered that much, you paint a certain picture in your head. Please come in. Hi. You paint a certain kind of picture about what you think child sex abuse is. And so I've had people come to me and say, oh, you know, I haven't experienced what you've experienced. I've just had like someone take a photo of me without my consent and post it online when I was a child, or I experienced non-contact abuse, or I just was touched one time, or anything like that. And I've never actually publicly shared the details of my abuse for a very deliberate reason, because I want to escape away from our notion of what we have come to define abuse to be. So how have we got here? A couple of ways, but I would like to share one case in Cleveland. So Cleveland was a northern county in the north of England. And in 1987, they tried to do something quite different, quite radical. I'm not saying for a good thing, but they did something very different. And they took 121 children out of their homes because there was a suspicion of childhood sexual abuse. it happened really quickly. It happened overnight. There were so many children taking away that the homes couldn't house them. Care homes couldn't house them. Children's homes couldn't house them. Some of them were just being put up in hospital wards. And it caused an absolute outcry, both because of the nature by which the abuse was investigated by the doctors involved in the case at the time, but also there was a whole campaign called Bring Back Our Children. And so you had parents coming on the TV saying, how dare these authorities taken our children away from us, bring them back, etc. Now, the problem with this is an inquiry happened. It found these two doctors guilty. They were the scapegoat of this whole campaign. Social workers were shammed and scammed, and so were therapists and anyone who tried to get involved. But an inquiry came out about 30 years later and found that 75% of the children were actually returned back to their homes where they were being abused. And this man, this gentleman who was on the telly was actually a child rapist and was later convicted, and his son was being sent back to him. Why am I telling you this? Because the effects of this meant that, yes, the children were sent back to abusive situations and those scars will last a lifetime. But also, it strengthened this very false narrative that if a child discloses child sex abuse, they are more likely to be lying than not lying, and that is absolutely not true. There's now a scarier aspect of this even more, where no formal expectations on higher education to actually teach childhood sexual abuse. So you could be going to study social work at uni, and it's not actually a requirement that you cover child sex abuse. And the repercussions of that are that when you go out to work as a social worker, you don't recognize childhood sexual abuse, right? And it's much more easier to log something as neglect because you've got a tick box, you know how to deal with neglect. How do you deal with child sex abuse? No one actually taught you, right? And then a general fear of other practitioners to get involved and support. And we've created this kind of institutionalized practice, which is already steeped in so much bias and hate and racism, but now it's been strengthened by this absolute fear to get involved. And what Cleveland were trying to do in a form of prevention ended up being something to be ridiculed by. The effects of this also show up in areas outside of child sex abuse. So as Aaron mentioned, I had a lovely month where I was working as a healthcare designer with a guy who I found out a month in was a convicted child sex offender. And it wasn't just me who was the only survivor. I was starting to do my activism work back then at the time. And 4 out of the 7 people on my team came up to me and was like, I've experienced this too, and I can't believe we've been working with this guy. I don't know what to do. And I think what really shocked me from the whole situation was the fact that nobody knew how to talk about this. Nobody knew what to say. HR certainly didn't know what to say. And he was fired immediately, but we all just swept it under the rug. And I thought, wow, this is so interesting because we are adults. Imagine how this conversation goes when you're children, right? So the bottom line is, and I know this from my whole lifetime, nobody knows how to talk about or respond to childhood sexual abuse. People find it easier to be silent instead of face the problem. And that, my friends, is the perfect environment for abuse to manifest. But it's not all doomy gloomy, because you came for a talk about serious joy. I promise that was the most doomy gloomy part. This is the next time, or the last time, I appeared in a newspaper. I just put that for the continuity. I don't know if anyone's heard of Grazia magazine. It's like the UK's budget version of Vogue. I was featured in that 2 weeks ago for my activism on child sex abuse. I run a load of podcasts and events, in-person events, and the whole point of it is to do things like this, have these conversations but with serious joy, and in the hope that we can educate allies and friends and potential partners of potential survivors about how to have that conversation, because the onus should not be on you who experienced the abuse to then disclose and teach people how to support you. So, what is Secrets Worth Sharing, and what is Serious Joy, which is the methodology I created around it? It looks like this. This is me and Dr. Anuja Sundaramurthy. She is Tamil Sri Lankan, and she runs a charity called ANBU, which supports Tamil survivors of child sex abuse. And right here, right now, we are having a discussion about child sex abuse. And we are laughing because she is also a qualified CAMS psychiatrist, which is a child and adolescent mental health professional. And she said, "It's so funny because I've recently been taught that there's this new thing rolling around called mindfulness in CAMS psychiatry. And as a Tamil woman, I've grown up doing mindfulness my entire life. It's just now it's being recognized by the NHS and these systems." And we are laughing because there are so many ways that we ourselves have taught ourselves to heal, which institutions have not yet caught up with, and we are rebelling against them. So, Serious Joy is a set of trauma-informed values that are underpinned by supporting a survivor in their wholeness. And that is very important. I will touch on that in a minute. Because, as I said at the beginning, as much as I was doing all of those wonderful things or going to fancy dinners or whatever it was, I still sat with and lived with this trauma. And so the conversations need to balance that kind of positive experience with that negative experience as well. My values, I'm not going to go into all of these, are difficult topics, serious joy. There's so many elements to our lives alongside our abuse, and these should be brought into our conversations about it. There is no proof needed. You will not be asked to prove that you experienced child sex abuse by recalling everything that's happened to you, and that's the same for anyone in this room, by the way. We do not judge or compare severity, and I think this is very key and aligns very much to the media thing. When people start to abuse children, it starts with the tiniest little actions. It might even be like, oh, I've given this kid like their favorite video game. And then it progresses into something else, and then something else, and then something else. And all forms of abuse are bad. The minute we start comparing, oh, my experience was worse than yours, X, Y, Z, mine was longer than yours, we're actually just focusing again on the wrong thing and not on the fact that our trust has been broken by abusers. And again, not everyone is ready to come out, not everyone will, and it's not safe for everybody to come out. And again, I'll touch on that in a minute. I see loads of people taking photos of this. You can find these values on the Secrets Worth Sharing website, so no worries. I have built the only UK platform for giving practical and approachable advice for talking about childhood sexual abuse for the allies of survivors. But of course, a lot of survivors come as well, and you can be an ally and a survivor. This is what I offer. So I've got a ton of free resources on my website about what you should and shouldn't say. They're 10-minute bite-sized episodes, and they're with somebody who has some sort of lived intersection of childhood sexual abuse. So for example, the first episodes I covered were Tamil culture, Vietnamese culture, where I'm from, dating, disclosing publicly, queerness. There's a host of topics on there, and you'll find them all explored on the site. Took that public, so did rooms, events like these. At my events, they're a little bit more edible. So people come, they get a free meal, it's a couple of like icebreaker things, and then you get to watch movie clips of scenes of child sex abuse and how they've been responded to. And then me and a therapist debunk them and say how the film advice was typically really bad. And then that creates a bit of an environment for people to have something that they can talk about externally to their own experience, where they can learn about child sex abuse. And right now, I am planning to build a museum of difficult topics. So it's going to be a pop-up museum where anyone can turn up and they learn about what a difficult topic is, how it's hard to talk about, how that changes based on place, time, context, whatever. And then we Trojan horse CSA at the end as like a mini exhibit. And I do talks and workshops and everything as well, so just hire me at your organizations. So far, I've done 14 podcasts, 7 are due to come out in November. I've raised £11,000 to do these events and sold out 7 of them around Dublin, Brighton, Croydon, places like that. But most importantly, 93% of the people who come to my events self-report that they have increased confidence in knowing how to talk about childhood sexual abuse. So for me, that is the biggest win. But through doing this work, I've noticed that no one has fully mapped out the end-to-end experience of disclosing and navigating support services. So I'm a designer, by the way, by background. Like, I'm not a trained therapist. This is not my crack. So I was like, okay, I've got the lived experience. Let me just like certify myself. So I went to the Center of Expertise on Child Sex Abuse, and I got CPD certified in 4 different types of abuse. And there was a ton of us in the room. There were charity workers, social workers, nurses, former police. And no one could explain to me what happens from the moment I choose to disclose till the very end in a nutshell. And I was like, if you professionals can't even do it, how are you expecting survivors to do it, let alone their allies and their communities? And that's if they even decide to tell anyone in the first place. So I set about merging together my design career in service design as well as my, I guess, child sex abuse vibes, and created a little bit of, this is a very simplified version, about the steps involved when you report child sex abuse. So this is what's supposed to happen, right? You report to the police, then a detective investigates the case. So, for example, that might be interviews or understanding, sometimes collecting health evidence, that kind of thing, email transcripts from back in the day, whatever. The survivor is assigned a victim liaison officer, and that's supposed to carry them all the way through their whole journey. The Crown Prosecution Service in the UK make a decision to charge the suspect if they find enough evidence. Bear that in mind. The suspect is charged, and then there's a trial and sentencing. As you can imagine, that is not how it goes. This is how it looks. So, I think first and foremost to highlight to you is that some people will never get past this point, right? Only the estimate of 1 in 4, by the way, is extremely conservative as it is, right? And of those people, only a quarter will ever even tell anyone about their abuse. So you're already dealing with 75% of survivors at step 0, okay? And I think it's so important to consider that in our journey. Yes, you report to the abuse to the police, but based on who's on call, how they handle it, even where the abuse took place, that's going to be a loopy journey, because they might be like, oh, well, you're from Croydon, but the abuse happened in the States, so well, that might be extra legislation. Oh, but something happened in Scotland, so, oh, we don't know. And in this process, you've spoken to like 50 people. The detectives and the police investigate the case. Sometimes this involves you as a grown-ass woman sitting in a safe house covered in teddy bears, because that's supposed to be like healing. You go through, you dig up all of these transcripts, emails you wrote to therapists or charities years and years ago, and it's just suddenly something that you were in control of because you thought it was your secret has become everyone's business in the blink of an eye, right? Also, I should add, sometimes people don't report. Sometimes people authorities come to people because they suspect they might be survivors as well. And that's what happened with my course. I had no intention of going to the authorities with what happened to me until my abuser abused someone else. And then in the interview process is when I thought, oh, should I say something? And then my family encouraged me on this journey. You're assigned a victim liaison officer, but I think what everyone forgets is that the victim liaison officer is also dealing with like 100 other cases that month. So they're going to forget to update you on everything. So you're going to have a moment here where you're like, what's happening with my case? Like, oh, we don't know. We'll get back to you. They never do. You do it again. Then the prosecution service make a decision. Of course, there's going to be a whole flurry around court dates. They get charged. You have to mentally prepare yourself for what you're going to say. You have to write a victim personal statement, which is kind of like the one you do for uni, except it tells you all the traumatic things that have happened in your life. Bit of a document. And then they're trialed. And I think what's really important to add is like, and now what? So in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of legal and justice, this person, if they're found guilty, is put away. And then what happens to the survivors, the families? What happens to the mess of this process? We're just supposed to believe it's like plain sailing, right? Many people drop off at this point, and that's if they ever even disclose. And one of the main reasons why is because they're told the reality. The reality is, if you disclose childhood sexual abuse to the authorities, to this day, you are 11% likely to get a successful conviction. That is wild. And I just wanted to highlight to the people in this room, it's not 11% likely because only 11% of the cases are guilty. A lot of the time, it's because people have dropped out or they can't find enough evidence. Or in the cases of historic child sex abuse, it really does just boil around to my word versus my abuser or my abusers. Also, this process takes on average 2 to 4 years. So if you consider that for most people, the average age for disclosing abuse is actually when you're in your 50s, it takes you 50 years, you come out. Then you've got to wait another 2 to 4 years for the 11% chance that you might get an institution's idea of justice. I think we need to change things. And this not only affects survivors, right? I'm just going to stat you on. I'm just going to add all the stats. 4.4 billion is lost in the UK market every year due to childhood sexual abuse. And that's not just due to things like the actual cost on the courts. This is solely on the labour market. So things like time taken off work to write a statement, to attend court, or sickness leave due to re-triggering or having to sort all of that out. And that's a conservative estimate in itself. Because of Cleveland, 77% of authorities do not provide dedicated support to children who have experienced sexual abuse, and 70% of individuals want clearer advice. And I thought, I cannot solve child sex abuse. No one person in the world can. But as a designer, I understand communication, and I know how communication works, and there must be something we can do to affect that, right? And as a designer, speaking to a ton of therapists, I'm sure you're thinking, why the hell is she here? And what does this tell me about the psychotherapy space? Fear of talking about childhood sexual abuse means inadequate training, means inadequate support, and it also means that a lot of the time therapists can be catching a lot of the failings of this system. So I've just tidied up the squiggles for ease, but we're imagining still that this is a messy process. This is the real CSA reporting journey. And many therapists are taught that they are going to be engaging with survivors at this point. And that is because baked into this process, amidst the social workers and police and whatnot, someone offers you 6 sessions of therapy. And you might be on a wait list, by the way, of like 2 years to even get that. And many of therapists expect that that is when people are going to take up that offer. In reality, people are more likely to take up therapy in these 3 spots. So of course, we talk about the people who never will ever disclose to anyone, and then they'll go to the therapist, if again, they do at all. Then there's a huge drop-off point, and it makes perfect sense around the time people are fed up with the system and they're like, I'm leaving this, I'm done. I'll seek support for myself. Big flux here. And then, which is like the case of me, what now? You've had your whole life upturned, you have to let that settle for a year, and then suddenly you're like, okay, maybe it's time to deal with my own stuff. The average age of someone disclosing their abuse in therapy is in their 50s, which I just said earlier. I will say, though, that most of that data is skewed towards white middle-class women because there is a bigger likelihood of that data being shared with these studies. So, what I thought I could do for the next little bit of time is share with you a few stories of people who sought therapy and it went wrong at different parts of this journey, right? And some tips from me and my community about things you might want to consider to embed into your practice so you can all become seriously joyful. Before I do that, I just wanted to highlight that survivors can come to you at any point in their journey, as I said, and that affects the type of support that they give. This is especially the case when you layer their identity, their experience, and their type of abuse to the situation. So for this, I'm going to talk about intersectionality. I know it's a term that everyone's heard time and time again, but to clear up, intersectionality was first poised by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was talking about what happens when you have experienced a social issue in multiple different ways. So, for example, you know what it is like to experience racism as a black person, but also sexism as a woman, and what happens when those two collide. And I thought, this is a beautiful way to talk about childhood sexual abuse. And amidst all of my training with the center, and thank you to them for giving it to me for free and all of that, I have never learned more than I have in these conversations that specifically ground on intersectionality. The black topics, Tamil cultural sensitivity, going public, being in care, queerness, dating, deafness, Vietnamese language. They are all topics that I had started this project with, partly because I felt that I had access to them and access to different survivors who had trusted me to tell their story. And then the blue ones are topics that are coming out in November. So I've got an episode on humour with comedian Johnny Pelham, and he talks about how he's an Apollo comedian. And his Apollo stand-up was about his abuse. And he talks about the whole way that you can use humor as healing. I've got one with a black guy called Dami, and he's incredible. And Davi basically experienced abuse in the West Indies, forgot about it for like 30 years, and then suddenly remembered. I've got one on somebody who is repeating behaviors that they saw as a child when they were a child and how they navigated it. I've got a great episode on transness and autism, safe sex work, and Christianity. So that was quite fun, telling the pastor that her episode was going to be followed by a sex worker, but they seem to be cool with each other. I know there's so many other intersections to cover, and this is only the start, but again, I'm hoping that I do these people justice in telling their stories so that you can learn something from them for your practice. And just a little reminder, but handling negative reactions to the abuse can honestly be worse than the abuse itself. So anybody here who's worried that, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? Like, it is a very real worry, but being silent is also a problem. So we really need to just be taking it on hand, because you having a difficult conversation is much easier to fix than the potential challenges you face to someone for a lifetime. So, step 1. Some people will never report their experience. I would love to share Dr. Ray O'Neill's expertise with you. He is a Dublin psychotherapist, and he only exclusively works with gay men who experienced childhood sexual abuse when it was illegal to be gay in Ireland. I think that's important for a number of reasons, but it tells you, one, that institutionally, as we know, the institutions are not set up to support everybody. If you were a gay man living in this period in Dublin and you disclosed abuse, you yourself would have been arrested for being gay and be engaging in that behavior. So how can you even begin to report if your own identity isn't being recognized, right? This is Sabian. Sabian's deaf, and he grew up in a community where being deaf was not as discussed, so he was kind of described as a slow guy, growing up, until he got his hearing aids. His abuse was via women. And again, he had only ever seen or heard about abuse in media as being from men, and there was a whole other layer there to kind of grapple with what happens when a woman is somebody that abuses. And then when you also add the layer of the fact that he's deaf and black and trying to go to authorities, he was like, even if I did go to the police, and I have considered it, I wouldn't be able to report my experience wholly, because I've heard that people focus on what you hear as part of your evidence, and I don't have that sense. So I'm scared that I won't be able to give evidence on words that were said or things that were reported. So again, a system not designed for a person. So my first tip is, take time to understand the complexities of the situation. And I really wanted to give flowers here to Pauline, the psychologist. You can follow her on Instagram. She works very closely with immigrant eldest daughters, such as myself. And she gives a lot of advice to people online about ways that they can be more culturally sensitive with their therapy. And I think it's very important, because sometimes in therapy, people want to try and find a common ground and build that relationship in that way. But when you add all of these intersections, there are sometimes things that you will never understand, and it's about baking a way to allow that person to feel safe that they can explain those things without feeling exhausted and confused and angry. Again, I'm not the professional here, so I'm just going to direct you all to Paula. Okay, part 2, the CPS. So again, lots of people, I guess the point here is a lot of people dropping out when they feel like the authorities don't really support them, right? And they've tried, they're told that this process is going to take another 2 years, and they're like, do you know what? This is more grueling than it's worth. This is a little sneak peek. So this is my episode with River. River is a trans man, and he's also autistic. And he experienced child sex abuse when he was socialized as a woman. And there was an incident where a school got involved and were trying to get him to report abuse. And the decision was made by his mother, not by him, to not talk to River about it, completely close up the experience, and just hope that he will forget. And again, there's echoes in that from Cleveland, because we're talking about the whole false memory thing, about childhood memory not being reliable, blah, blah, blah. And so that was what River did, until he got help on his autism through a therapist, and suddenly started to realize that what he had experienced was childhood sexual abuse. And he tried very hard to find a therapeutic support service that could cater to his needs. But here right in was the problem. If he went to male support groups, he couldn't identify with what they were talking about because he experienced abuse when socialized as a woman. If he went to female support groups, he'd be really worried about the way his gender would be perceived and that he'd be kicked out, but also that he would be re-triggering other people by being a male person in this space. And what he talks about so beautifully is about how his tranness and his autism are so interlinked, but how that also got weaponized for his abuser. Because abusers, when they see somebody who's maybe different or thinks differently and is quite lonely because of that, they could say, well, I'll be your friend if you just do this, that, and the other. And he talks about how being on that journey of understanding his own mind and his own autism and his own transness was really powerful to him. The learning from this is encourage the person to understand what useful help could look like and how to ask for it. River's also chronically ill and disabled. And he also talks about one day he was sitting in a chair with a therapist, and the therapist was like, "Are you in pain? Are you okay?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I am in pain. I never really realized that before." And then realized that he could go to the doctor and get help for all of these chronic issues. But he was like, because no one had ever really highlighted to me that this experience wasn't normal, I guess I just thought it was what everyone dealt with. And I think there's a really powerful job there as a therapist to really tap into what people feel, what people need, and that's not always what they feel or know that they could need in that moment. And another one that I would say here that is crucial is admin is allyship. When you are going through a case or when you are trying to disclose to someone, you are putting yourself yet again in the most vulnerable situation, right? And not everyone in our lives is as great at talking about emotions. And that's fine, because we still need to eat, we still need to do paperwork, we still need someone to remind us what time and days our court things are and offer lifts to stations or whatever. There are ways that people can support survivors that don't involve talking about emotions. And I think having that in your arsenal as a therapist and asking them, maybe we can use a session to help you write that police email. Maybe we can use a session to help you plan out how your next week is going to go and just do some admin about what the hell you're going to eat over this time. That can be so, so powerful to somebody getting support. Admin is allyship. And then finally, the whole what now vibes. I will share a tiny bit about myself. So I was at a situation where my abuser had been let out of jail and everyone forgot to tell me. So I found out by accident after I contacted the authorities. And it obviously brought up quite a lot. And I went to one of the elders in my Vietnamese community, someone very close to me. And I was just saying, I feel really conflicted because, I didn't even want to go on this journey. I'm doing this for a lot of people. But I don't feel like him coming out has actually done anything for me. Or even him going to jail. And the elder was like, how dare you ask me this? The fact you've had this means your justice has been served, and now we have to focus all of our support to supporting the abuser and their family at this time. And there's a very intricate reason for why that's the case, because culturally, there's a lot of hierarchical thinking. That elder was thinking, okay, we support this person, and when we support this person, Sophia ranks lower, and she's getting her own support, whatever. And I think what's really interesting about that experience is that I went to a therapist and I was trying very hard to explain this to them. She wasn't Vietnamese. And she just goes to me, I think if you sat your elder down and explained to them how you were feeling, they'll understand. And I actually just like chuckled a little bit. I was just a bit like, sorry, I didn't realize I now had to like explain the whole history of my culture and why that is in this 1 hour session. Like, I don't think it's possible. And that's not to say that people can't support when they're not from the same culture, but there are certain assumptions that we can make that can be really, really damaging. And I think the conversation should have been more, okay, let's understand this cultural notion of justice, where it comes from. Because in our notion of justice, it might look like, I don't know, the legal and support service. But in this notion of justice, it's protecting the family and acting like everything is still fine and showing that everything is still fine by having the abuser at our weddings and having them at our parties. And we have to learn how to navigate that system as well. I share all this because, as I'm sure you can imagine, I think that our legal and justice and support system is intricately and fundamentally broken and flawed. And I think that for the time being, while we're still trying to fix it, we need to explore alternative forms of justice so that survivors can get some form of additional support while they can. What does this look like? Just a couple of resources. First of all, if you still want to go down the legal and justice route, but you don't want to be personally involved and you want to protect yourself as a victim, you can report to Crime Stoppers. They're an anonymous charity. They're a charity that keep your anonymity. They really do. And then they collect that data and feed it back to authorities later, and that's just to help them track abusive behavior. Second one is reporting to Internet Watch Foundation if you see any indecent child abuse images. And I will just take a moment here to educate people. We hear a lot in the industry, child pornography. It's not called child pornography, it's child sexual abuse imagery or material. Because if we start calling it pornography, we're viewing it through the eyes of abusers. And then finally, one of my favorite resources is by a group called Abolitionist Futures. And they talk about methods for exploring alternative strategies to address gender-based violence. And they have a section there around childhood sexual abuse. And I think what's really nice about them is that they have created a bit of a guide that you can review and use and explore in your therapy as well. What you've seen today is a pilot of a bigger project I'm working on. So, again, I said that no one has really set out to track out that journey, which also means we don't know where the biggest flaws are. We don't know where people are most likely to drop off. We know that the system is screwed, but we don't know where exactly they could most do with support. So I want to conduct research and development on the first comprehensive trauma-informed journey map that maps out that crazy diagram that I showed you and puts it into a much more distinct visual system that can be marked by all the different actors involved so that you can understand as a survivor where your role is as an ally, where the police's role is, what the lawyers are supposed to be doing right now. Because again, if no one can describe it to a survivor, how are they going to expect us to navigate it? I've started doing this work, so this is just a section of like very messy scraps that I've done where I'm starting to map out each individual stage, the key points in red where people drop out. I've got a column for survivors, a row for allies, a row for abusers, and it grows based on when people come into the experience. And I can imagine that looking like a really helpful resource, which also teaches therapists where someone's likely to be at, how somebody might be showing up to your practice or your clinic, and how you can support them better. I have a wonderful network of people who support me, though a lot of the work is very alone sometimes, but I have a lovely big group of directors and mentors. And I was wondering if anyone would want to join me on that journey. So I'm looking for investment, teaching opportunities, testing sessions, and research partners to really bring this to life. If you are interested in that, or the Museum of Difficult Topics, or to be honest, anything else at all, there are my details. Thank you so much for watching. And hi to the online people, I see you. We're going to make some time for your questions now as well. Yeah, Luke's just going to hand around a microphone, if that's okay. Hi.
Are you there? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That was really helpful and really good, because you're right, there isn't a clear, and I was chatting to this lady, I've been in the job 40 years, but when I trained as a social worker was we did have a childcare pathway, which, so my training was in the 90s, and we had a childcare pathway that was very specific around looking at, as a social worker, recognising child development and all the things around that. But my understanding now is, as a social worker, it's a generic path, and there isn't the specialism. And I do think this is having huge implications. I'm also a play therapist, so I've been working in this field for a very long time now. And when you're talking about your map, I think it's fantastic. I genuinely believe that, because having worked as that. However, I think there's something about even starting earlier for the children. Because how do they put into words what we as adults sometimes can't do?
Yeah.
And how do we get people to recognise their play or their presentation is telling us those things, not just relying on the verbal disclosure? I think that would be a lovely area of work.
No, thank you so much for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. People are so often saying, like, there are often no signs when children are abused, and there really are, but we don't teach it. And I used to go by that line of thinking a lot, actually. I used to be like, I was the happiest child, I was the loudest child, I was a bit of a diva, still am, I suppose. But like, you don't notice that because you're trying so hard to show that you're okay, right? But I was looking at a family video a few years ago, and my abuser was there, and I'd just come to the end of a zip wire on a park. And the second that I got to the end, I just got off, and I just walked off, and I was like, I'm cool, because he was lifting all the other children off of the thing. And I looked back, and I was like, I see that now, knowing what that is, but it's really hard to expect other people to see that. So you're right, there is some sort of training involved in that. And to recognise that this sometimes doesn't present in the way we expect.
And I think the other thing for me is recognising that actually children will play it out. And so I was in a school observing a little person, and I could see, because I'm trained in post-traumatic play and all of that sort of stuff, I could see what was played out, and then he went into a full trauma response, ran around the classroom hitting other children. But if we're not trained to spot those things, then how can he put that? He was 4. How did he put that into words?
Yeah.
That's so. If we can, it'd be lovely to help you anyway.
Come to me after. Hi.
Should we alternate online, or should I go to?
Online and then there. Is that okay? Sure. Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so
Hi.
much for sharing that. And
Thank you.
Very inspiring talk, and thank you so much for your bravery.
Thank you.
I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, and I see women all the time with very clear signs that something has happened, but many of them, A, don't expect to talk about this, B, may have actually lost the memory or packed the memory away. They're actually not aware, and sometimes it may take 5 visits until eventually there is an openness to bring this about. What would you say to your obstetrician gynecologist? How would they best start this conversation? Have you any advice for me or for my colleagues?
I would say in those moments, we are sometimes taught to have a professional self and a personal self. And I think these are one of those moments where the personal self has to really just shine through and just say, I've observed this, you've mentioned this. Is there anything that you might want to share that could be related to your childhood, to whatever they've said?
Yeah.
And I think just bear in mind that they might not say, but that I talk a lot about peppercorns. I think sometimes when you peppercorn and you lead by example, that you are someone who knows your stuff, that you know resources. Because I think there's one thing getting someone to speak with you and trust you, and there's another thing about knowing what to do and how to direct them. And I think even just showing or mentioning that you are aware of different resources, of different thought points on this, that might be a dialogue for them to make a mental note. Oh, my obstetrician might be somebody that I could talk to about this. And that's particularly, I'd really direct you to look at FGM and different ways that that can manifest, because with female genital mutilation, which is also a type of child sex abuse, a lot of women who have experienced that living in the UK only find out that they've experienced that through the pregnancy process, because otherwise no one was ever to tell them that what they had was different, right? So I think just being really equipped and aware of resources about what you would do in a disclosure, and then realizing that this is something you can peppercorn, and like this person said, there might be signs that you can show time and time again. They might say, oh, nothing, but then next time, if you just ask it gently again, you never know what they'd be willing to share. So I always say to people, it's not one big conversation, it's a series of little peppercorns.
Which is a challenge then in the specialist clinic. Because
Yeah.
they often come only for one visit. And the tragedy is that the visit is often around an exam, which may well be re-triggering if that is not performed in the most gentle and
Yes.
most trauma-informed way.
And of
So-
course, you're so pressed for time, right? It's not like you have a day per patient for these appointments. And that's where it's, again, very systematic. But yeah, perhaps it's something you could talk with your clinic about and just, yeah.
I
Thank
just wanted
you.
to hear your perspective. What would you think would be best to do there and then?
Thank you. I mean, I'm not an expert. I've never had a child, but yeah. Can we do, I know this person was waiting, one online, and then 1, 2, 5. I will come. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Hi. Hi. Hello. Oh. I promise I just said it once.
Hi, it's me.
Oh, hi. I was like, that background looks really familiar.
I don't. I'm not sure how this has happened. I'm not sure.
No online?
Okay. There's an anonymous question, which is, I guess, why I'm here. Do you know if it's possible to report CSA to the police simply to have the person on record in case other people come forward, but not to pursue a conviction?
There is a way via Crime Stoppers, so have a look at that resource. I really am not the expert in this field, though, so I will just direct you to call and speak to Crime Stoppers for UK law. And even the question, by the way, to this person, thank you so much for that question, even you asking Crime Stoppers is anonymous, so don't even worry about how that's going to be recorded. And if you're really worried, just make a fake email, borrow a friend's phone, and do it not in your house, and you're even more untraceable. But yeah, to contact Crime Stoppers, but there is a way. Hi.
Hi, I had a question.
Sorry, hi.
No, hi. I just want to say two things. First of all, I'm a survivor, thriver. I like to use thriver.
Look at you, you are.
Yeah, because I fucking am. Like you are. And advocating. There's a couple of things I just want to say that, like, you talked about joy. And it's possible to have joy, like we're not all victims and broken. And I really appreciate your manner and your power in how you're representing. And I'm doing the same because, there's a deficit language that goes along that I actually think encourages us not to report because there's an idea of women who are broken, who are abused, or men. And I just, I'm really interested just to hear a little bit more about your joy and what you do in the joyful space, because I actually, in my own healing, like finding joy has been so important, and learning how to experience joy has been really important. And I just really appreciate just you demonstrating to this room even that we're just fucking great people and we can talk and laugh and be open and it's not all doom and gloom at the end of it's of course horrific, but it's also possible to live amazing lives and actually use your experiences to change the world, which is what I see you doing and what I'm trying to do. So I really appreciate it. But like, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about the joyful, what you're doing in that space, because I want to do more of that myself in my own life.
I mean, you're doing it, first of all. Like, the way you spoke about it is exactly the way I kind of practice it. And I think everything I do stems from the fact that we do not laugh at what the person experienced. We laugh at the way it's talked about, because that is hilarious. Like, how are we living in a society where you can react to child sexual abuse in a way that is sometimes more damaging than the abuse itself, right? And that's not to negate the abuse, by the way. I have a whole trauma-informed methodology on it. You can see it on my website. But I think essentially it comes down to that. And I think I was really surprised when I started going into these spaces that people didn't do that. Because I think obviously we're taught from a professional standpoint to have this whole like screen up. But again, like the movies was another great one. If you have somebody who does not talk about their emotions, find a scene in a movie that's kind of similar and then just rip it to shreds in front of them, and you will slowly watch them change and have those conversations. I particularly find that with people socialized as men, movies are a great way to have those discussions. And I do film clubs as well, so if you're ever in Brighton in January, February, and March, come along and you can see it in person. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing as well. I'm so sorry, I don't remember who was next. I think it was you.
Hello, thank you
Hi.
so much for standing in your power. My name is Joanne, I'm from South Africa. 1 in 3 people, children get abused in South Africa, so the rates of violence is quite high.
Yeah.
So my question and my curiosity is, there's so many wonderful organizations like yours that work independently. Back home, we often find teachers, for example, or swimming coaches that get into spaces where children are building a beautiful connection with the trusted adults, and then they get abused. These abusers then get shoved off or fired, and then they move on to the next school. Is there a global database that offenders can be...
A database for offenders?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. There are global databases for survivor support.
Yeah.
And
And the second one is child trafficking. It's global. So if there's a way that all these organizations can basically collaborate rather than working in isolation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. First thing I will say is this is exactly why this problem is so archaic and outdated. Like, even with individual signs of abuse that aren't child trafficking, when there's more than one nation involved, it becomes so complex, so complicated, and people drop out before they even report. That hasn't existed either. The same applies for child sex abuse trafficking, for FGM, for so many other things. So unfortunately, no, there is not. There is a conference in November this year organised by WHO and UNICEF, and it is the first ever global conference on childhood sexual abuse. And one of the demands as part of that is changing the way that policies work, and they've invited a minister from every country. I'll actually shamelessly plug that I'm representing the UK at that conference. So I will personally haggle down and just be like, what are you doing? But no, unfortunately, it does not exist. But yeah, thank you.
I've got the microphone, so thank you so much.
To this lady behind us.
Sophia, extraordinary story, you're extraordinary, and what a privilege to hear the lived experience. I'm a psychiatrist based in Australia. Most of my work is in working one-on-one with people who've experienced child sexual abuse. But what I wanted to kind of talk about is the Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse, which happened in Australia some years ago now, and is happening in Canada, and Ireland's just produced its scoping studies on abuse in Catholic schools. And with that came a redress scheme where thousands of survivors of institutional sexual abuse are coming forward and going through a process of telling their stories, those that can. Of course, the majority can't. And I guess one of the comments I wanted to make relates to some of the other questions that have been raised around trauma and memory. I actually give quite a few workshops on trauma memory to solicitors who work in abuse law, which has now become a specialty in Australia, because it is not possible to give a coherent narrative of things that have happened. But there's a lot of evidence around the fact that power and social structures can actually influence if you remember and what you remember.
Yeah.
And as well, when abuse happens in primary carer relationships, betrayal trauma it can be pro-social not to remember. And I think you made that comment about often it's not safe to disclose. It's not even safe to acknowledge it's happened in terms of your internal world. And I really think that it's important for people working in this space to understand memory and trauma, because there's a huge amount of work, burgeoning amount of research and work just in the last decade on that. A lot of it's been published. And I think the Royal Commission in Australia gave us much broader access to that information. And it really is important in understanding who can disclose, how they can disclose, and also making sense of not remembering. Because people don't forget, they just don't remember until things that can re-trigger. But again, thank you so much. I think you're extraordinary.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll look into it. I'd really like to hear from this lady at the back, please. Oh, sorry. We'll get to you as well.
Shall I go first then?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, my name is Pam. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation and impartation of knowledge and understanding. I'm really quite impressed that you've included on your list Christianity. And I say that because a lot of people have this perception that the church is a safe place, and it should be a safe place. And it's not widely talked about, abuse, but we know that abuse happens in all different forms of life. And now it's been recognized at the highest level that safeguarding is important. And sort of ministers and leaders and workers now have to undergo safeguarding training, and churches have to have safeguarding policies, and you have to do the police check, DBS checks, and so on. But I just wondered, and I really believe that your presentation, what you've talked about, should actually be something that should be infiltrated in the churches. They need to.
Amen.
So I'm wondering how you intend to develop relationships with churches or ministers, because I happen to be in the church as well, so I'd like to know. And I'd like to join with you at some point
Thank you,
in
Pam.
further in this information, if I may.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. I will just quickly answer that. We can talk at the end, but I will quickly answer that. So I myself grew up Catholic. I think there's a really interesting discussion on forgiveness as well, and how that plays out in the Bible and the church versus different people's understanding of it. I would also direct you to look at Chioma Alade. She is a Nigerian pastor living in the UK who was abused by the church as a child and then became a pastor. And she talks about this so powerfully and so eloquently, and I think she'd be also someone great to partner with. But I'll talk to you at the end. Hi.
Hey, sorry, I've snuck forward from the back of the room because I think I needed to speak to you.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. I've been an idiot and actually just realised I signed up for this talk and realised that we've actually spoken on LinkedIn, because I do a lot of work on the BBC and done programmes and things around that. But my work is mainly based around sort of changing the court systems.
Would you feel comfortable moving forward, and then the camera online can pick you up? Is that okay?
Is that okay?
Yeah, have your moment, please.
Hey, everyone. So I do work more around the court system. So firstly, I would absolutely love to sort of join you on this. I think so much of where you spoke about the process that people go through is just mind-boggling. They've been through enough already. We've been through enough already, as I imagine there are many we's in this room. And the second thing, which is a little bit cheeky, but I just thought many of us are probably here for the next couple of days and staying locally. And I wondered, it's a bit of a shot in the dark, but maybe if some of us at some point, maybe this evening, wanted to go and have dinner together, whether you're an ally, a survivor, but I just think it'd be so nice to be able to sit and have dinner with people so we can actually talk properly. Do you know what I mean? I don't know who's around. I'll linger if you want to. We'll find somewhere to go for dinner, but it would mean so much to me. I'm 19, so I've still got a whole world of sort of healing ahead, and some of you are way further in that journey, but that's enough from me. I'll let everyone else ask their question, but I just wanted to ask. Thank you.
I should say I won't be able to come to dinner. I'm going straight after this, but please do go for dinner with Poppy.
Okay. Where do you want me to go? I'm not sure. I'll pass that to you if you like. Well, that's a lot of pressure. There you go.
Are there any online questions? No? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to go to dinner. Oh, it would be lovely. Yeah, to just network with people here. Just on the back of what you were saying about Christianity, I did work with people that have been abused by the lead safeguarding officer, sadly, in churches. So, you know, we also have to be careful that people get into these positions of power and authority. What I really want to say is that I think we also need to look at, I know these are difficult conversations to have and people don't want to talk about CSA, but I also want to think about, or us to think about, who are the gatekeepers preventing research into this as well.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, because I have submitted a few research proposals in the past or asked to do certain research. I do some associate lecturing as well. And time again, I'm told that the ethics committee will not allow this. And I want to know who's on the ethics board, who's writing the ethical sort of standards, and then I know there are so many people that are survivors of this that want to tell their story, but I think it's also looking at the power and control of the ethics boards that are preventing this research going ahead.
Yeah, and it's all government money that's shutting down. Like the independent inquiry into child sex abuse in 2019 was the most comprehensive this country had ever had. There were 16 recommendations from it, 2 only got taken seriously, and then they just got very silently dropped this year. And there's a whole campaign to carry that out, but you're so right. I'm really aware that I'm kind of hogging all your time. If you need to go, please do. Thank you. Just pop me an email. I really appreciate all of you coming, yeah? And I'll take one final question. Oh, I should really take an online. I'll come to you after, yeah? Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Hi. This is for the lady who was supposed to be on screen earlier, and it just got a bit mixed up.
Okay.
So this lady, Anna Maria, had a comment. She said, when I told my dad about my CSA, his response was, well, that guy is impotent. He could not have done anything to you, even if he had wished to. That was his way of supporting me. And as we didn't get to see her, I still really felt it was important for her comment to be heard.
Absolutely. And just to remind the person who said, I don't know what their gender was, but yeah, that response. Sometimes people say it out of a way of well-meaningness because they've had the shock of not being able to understand that the abuser could do this thing. But just be sitting present in your truth and hopefully you can find a space that does support and affirm you in that way, because that is not okay. But thank you for sharing that. Thank you. I really want to hear from this person because I know they've been waiting for a while.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course. I really appreciate you coming. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah. Thank you very much for the great conversation. Really mega important topic. One of the things I was thinking as I was listening to the different players talk today is there's a generational piece to this that I think is really important. And you triggered me when it says, white middle class women age 50 talking about childhood abuse. And there's a reason for that, when I look at who our parents were and our grandparents. So when we shared how it wasn't received by families, right? And how we didn't know how to discuss that even more than today.
Yeah.
So I just want to bring up in a room like this, when I saw, was it Poppy, the lovely Poppy coming up, 19 years old, that we need to think about how we use that. There are women and men of a certain age now that were shunned, that lost parents over this.
Yeah.
Haven't spoke to my mother for 20 years for the fact that she discounted what our uncle did to both me and my sister. And it was my sister and I in our 30s that actually were able to come to terms with it and prove to each other that we believed each other. And there was a reason we hadn't had a relationship until then. So I think there's a generational piece where we need to make sure we're creating communities of men and women of our age now to come together and support you and what you do. Because not only is it freeing for us, but it's making sure that the next generation who are way better at talking about this can have those discussions. So I love the comment earlier, but can we start the diagram? We need to do the diagram where you've got it, but we need to go further back and make sure we're educating the next generations, and especially schools, teachers, parents, I think they'd be way more open to it now than our previous generations would have been to have those conversations. So thank you very much. I'll be taking this back and talking with my children and our families about this. So thank you.
And I will just say, just as we're wrapping up, but like, yes, our generation may be more vocal on certain things, but we absolutely need to learn from the generations above. In 2 weeks, I'm doing an event in Vietnamese. It's Vietnamese and English in London. And it's with myself and a therapist in her 40s. And basically, I read her a letter that I wrote in Vietnamese when I was asking support from my elders. And she said, yeah, technically the words make sense, but you should also add this, 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 this. And she brought this knowledge that I would never have known in my years to share. So there are so many gems that need to be passed down, and we cannot solve this without being intergenerational.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's easier, I agree with you. I'm saying there's strength in numbers and the different generations and the different cultures. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. I can talk to you after. Thank you. Thanks.